lovely people. Welcome to the second part of my May reading wrap-up.
Sophie vlogs.
The first part was my Asian Readathon wrap-up, which I will link to down below in case you haven't seen it. In this part, I'm just going to talk about everything else that I read in May. A small disclaimer is that I'm filming this during the June heat wave. I feel very hot. So I'm going to try and keep my brain going and not dissolve. I will start off with a book that took me a while to read, but I had a really fun time doing so. And this is the Makioka Sisters by Tanizaki, which is translated from the Japanese by Edward G. Seidensticker. This is a chunky book. It is very much like you are just following a family, which is the Makioka family. There are 4 Makioka sisters. It's set in between the end of the First World War and it's sort of set in the lead up to the Second World War. And then the Second World War does happen a bit during this, but it's very much background. Very much this is like a domestic book that is focused on this family. We have these 4 sisters. One of the oldest sister is sort of slightly separate because the main family, as they are, they don't live in the same place as the rest of these sisters. So we're really following 3 sisters mostly. And within those 3 sisters, our main point of view character that we sit with is Sachiko, who is the second oldest sister. She is married. Yukiko is the third oldest sister, and she has been, they've been trying to arrange a marriage for her for a long time. The youngest sister, Teiko, essentially Teiko tried to elope with someone when she was much younger. This impacted Yukiko's marriage prospects, and so a very large amount of this book is about like trying to arrange a marriage for Yukiko. This family used to be much better off than they are, and that sort of also affects, like, they used to turn people down for reasons that now they would not really be able to entertain. And so a lot of this is quite domestic against sort of a very background sort of changing Japan. Like, you get to see a lot of how the First World War affected things, and then also how the Second World War kicking off is affecting things, but it's always quite background and sort of like the backdrop against which all of this family drama is played against. So you see how class differences have changed. The youngest sister is sort of almost like pursuing a business in some ways, and that's very controversial, isn't it? She's not just a lady who does sewing and textiles for pleasure, but it's actually because something that she wants to do to make money, and that's quite controversial. So there's a really interesting look at sort of like society and how society has changed and how the fortunes of what was a very old family is changing. And so that was very interesting to read. And then also, this is one of those where like there are dramas that happen in this. Like there's a lot of like natural disasters that are sort of add tension to the plot. But the actual happenings is you're just sitting with a family as there are small domestic dramas. There are like, will Yukiko marry this man? Oh, which man will Teiko marry? Like, because there's a few options there, and that kind of thing. So it's one that I wasn't sure how I was going to find it, but actually as it went on, I found myself really immersed, and I just sort of enjoyed the telling of it. It's a very strange ending, and I will talk about it with no spoilers. But you go from this book that is so concerned with like minutiae of their lives, and then the ending is almost abrupt in the way that you just don't really know. You end at a point where things are not fully resolved, and I found that very interesting to go from like such detail on their daily lives and the happenings and that kind of thing to just like, I don't know what's going to happen. I could probably talk about this a lot longer, actually. There's so much to like think about, but on the whole, I'm really glad I picked it up. I don't know where to go with Tanizaki's work. I've read some of the blurbs for some of his other books, and I'm not sure if they appeal to me. So if you're someone who's read this author's work, I'd be really interested to hear where you would recommend going next. Yeah, an interesting read for sure. As I mentioned in, I think, last month's reading wrap up, I'm getting more into audiobooks. So I listened to Enchantment, Reawakening Wonder in an Exhausted Age by Katherine May. This is the author of Wintering, which I have not read, but I would really like to read. I gave this one a 3-star. I think I would like Wintering more. I'm very interested to read that one still. What I liked about Enchantment is I'm currently forgetting the narrator's name because I read it right at the beginning of the month, but the audiobook narrator had a really lovely voice and tone and way of delivering the information. I really enjoyed like the act of listening to her speak. That was really nice. Enchantment is split by the elements, so like fire, earth, water, air, and each sort of section is like chapters that are sort of loosely tying into these elements. It was written sort of during the pandemic, so a lot of this is dealing with the pandemic and how the pandemic made us all feel, and then sort of that universality of feeling burnout, and then where do you go from there? How do you pick yourself back up? And that was an element that I definitely really enjoyed. That's like one of the opening chapters, and I definitely found that interesting because she's talking about having a very young child and sort of losing herself and losing like the moments which she would use for contemplation and that kind of thing, and stillness, like losing them because it wasn't really a possibility, and then how important it is to rediscover them. And I really thought I really connected with that bit. I think some of the nature of collections like this is like some of the other chapters occasionally, like some of them just I didn't really connect with, and others felt a little bit levered into this thematic element structure. I think maybe what it is that the way that this book is marketed with that subheading of like reawakening wonder in an exhausted age is, I think I thought that there would be more answers, and maybe the point is that there is no answer and you have to find it out for yourself, and I get that. I think maybe the way that subheading makes it feel like it's being pitched is almost like a little bit more self-helpy than it is, whereas actually it's just personal musings, and the nature of personal musings is that sometimes they really hit for you and sometimes you're just like but I enjoyed listening to it. I listened to it on some very long walks, which is a way that I have found to reawaken wonder in my life. So that was good. After that, I'm going to mention a cookbook. This is Pepperpot Diaries, Stories from My Caribbean Table by Andi Oliver. I love Andi Oliver. She hosts Great British Menu, amongst other things. I just think she's fabulous. She's one of my like dream dinner party guests. I'm talking about this in the wrap-up because there are writings in between the recipes, and I like cookbooks, so sometimes I will talk about cookbooks. That's just where we're at. I haven't cooked anything from it yet, but I have the ingredients to do so. That is a future topic when I have the time. I'm going to delve into a few recipes, but there's lots that I'm super excited to cook. I just wanted to mention it really because I'm sort of reformulating the way that I eat since I was diagnosed with all of my food allergies last year, and Caribbean cuisine is something which I think will be quite accessible to me, actually, with the things that I can't eat, sort of cuts certain cuisines that I used to eat a lot of. So I'm sort of rediscovering things. Andi Oliver is from Antigua, but she also, like, a lot of the recipes in this, she talks about how, like, oh, well, this is the version that I grew up with in Antigua, but if you're from these other places, you would maybe have more of this element, less of this element, that kind of thing. So that was really interesting. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to cooking from it. I just think she's delightful. It was a lovely little cookbook read. Another audiobook that I listened to was Paris the Memoir by Paris Hilton, which I decided to listen to this because I watched Uncarly's review video, which I will link down below, and that was enticing, and it made me want to sort of listen to the whole book myself. And I definitely I think I really enjoyed it, actually. The thing about Paris Hilton is I think that the idea that most people have of her is very much like a constructed entity. And I think that most people who are in the entertainment business for a long time, like, they are constructed entities. You know, like, the vision of most celebrities that you have is the vision that they choose to put out there. That's the nature of existing in the limelight. What I enjoyed about this is what I tend to enjoy about memoirs that work for me is where I come away and I feel like I do have a better understanding of that person and like what makes them tick, what their values are, that kind of thing. I don't need a celebrity memoir to tell me every single detail of their life, but I do like to come away feeling like I have actually got an insight into them rather than it being like a fluff piece. And I actually think that this one, I have come away, like she talks about in the opening, how her ADHD will influence the way that she writes the book. She loves a run-on sentence. She loves commas. She does little bracket asides in it and that kind of thing. And the way that the book is structured is showing you the way that her thought processes work, in that you might start off somewhere, midway through you're like, how did we get here? But by the end it all loops back together, because that's how her brain works. And that was an element that I thought worked really well, particularly with the audiobook, with her reading it, like her giving inflections and that kind of thing, like really aided in the experience process of that. So I really liked that. One thing I will also say is that this delves into some very heavy topics. If anyone else has watched the documentary that was on YouTube a few years ago, where she touches on the schools that she was put in forcibly by her parents, you'll have an idea. But she goes into a lot of depth about those schools. Essentially, like, she was abducted in the middle of the night and taken to these schools where you are punished with hard labor. It is extremely abusive, and she goes into it in a lot of depth, much more depth than that documentary did. So I would give like a massive trigger warning to that. Also, like sexual assault, rape, that kind of thing. Like, Paris Hilton goes into a lot of depth about those topics. And if those are things that would trigger you, I would say definitely go into this mindfully, because it's not something that is just a passing thing. It's very much like a meat of this. On the whole, I thought that this was done in a really engaging way. I would consider myself neither a fan nor a hater of Paris Hilton, but I definitely like enjoyed the reading process of this book. One thing I will say, which is, I'm not being pointed, it's just like, I've seen like a review of this book where someone was like, she didn't like the school because it was the only time in her life people said no to her. And I do just want to mention that, like, it is very documented that actual abuse went on at these institutions. It isn't just like a rich person complaining. This is like very much an abusive situation that many children went through and some people died in. So if we could not minimize that, I think that would be great. There are moments in this where the inherent privilege of growing up in a very rich household comes across. God, I don't want to read anyone talk to me about how they like crypto and NFTs, let alone Paris Hilton doing it. Not interested. So it's not that there are no moments in this book which lack self-awareness. There are some. It's just, I think when it comes to that particular institution and all that thing she's talking about, I think we should be mindful of not like minimizing those experiences under the umbrella of like, she's just a spoiled rich girl. A fiction book that I really enjoyed is Saving Time by Jodi Taylor. This is the third book in the Time Police series, I think. Are we on the third? Yeah, this is the third book. So sorry, I'm losing track. Jodi Taylor has done so many books and I have read so many of them that I'm like, where are we at? The Time Police series is an offshoot of the Chronicles of St. Mary's. This is looking at Team Weird, which is Matthew, Jane, and Luke, who are very much like the weirdo outsiders in the Time Police, but the Time Police itself is like going through this time of change. It was invented in order to provide structure to the timeline, because with the invention of time travel, people start doing loads of things and messing with structural integrity and the world starts crumbling. So it is an institution that has been very like shoot first, ask questions later. They were like an antagonist in the Chronicles of St. Mary series, but this series is really like fleshing them out as like an entity, and an entity that is like at a time of change. And I am loving it. All of the stuff to do with like, what will the Time Police be? Like, I just think it's so interesting. There are different factions. There's definitely someone in the Time Police that is betraying information that the baddies shouldn't know, and all this kind of thing. So everything to do with this growing threat, and like, people are going to want to take power away from this institution because rich people will want to exploit the timeline for their own gain financially, and they won't care about how it will affect the very structure of reality. And I'm loving all of that. It's delicious. I'm also much more enjoying like Jane, Luke, and Matthew as characters. I think we are like moving away from some of the more like stereotypical elements of their characters. There's a lot in this to do with Luke and his relationship with his father, and things that like questioning that, like, is his dad up to shady things, and does Luke interact with that as a time police officer or as a son? I'm really enjoying that like complexity to Luke's character. Jane is given a lot of time in this that I really enjoyed. She's still a little bit doing the Bolshe Jane Wimpy Jane thing, but significantly less, which is good because that's just a narrative element that I don't need. Like, I don't need a character to have like two versions of themselves in their brain who tell them like, you should hide, you should grow some balls. Like, I'm not into that. I just want to see her develop as a character, like wholly, you know. I don't know if that makes sense, but you get a lot of insight into Jane's backstory as well. I think maybe Matthew is the one who's taking a little bit more of a back seat currently, but again, we do get little insights into him in this. So what this is my waffly way of saying is I'm really, really enjoying the Time Police series. I have the fourth book, which I'm either going to read if I can fit it in June, she says, recording in June, or if I could, I might save it for July, which is my birthday month, and I like to save books that I'm particularly excited for my birthday month, so I might do that, I'm not sure. But suffice to say, I think the Time Police is doing some very interesting things, and I'm super enjoying it. The book I read on my Kindle is Between the Deep Blue Sea and Me by Lurline, Wailana, McGregor, who is a Hawaiian author. This is a very short little novella that is following our main character, Moana. She is Hawaiian, but she lives in LA, and she is engaged to her fiance. They have a life together. She works in museums. Her role in the museum is that she's working on this project, which is interacting with the Native American tribes of the area and essentially trying to heal some of those wounds from like stealing their belongings and putting them in museums, and creating a space instead that is collaborative, where museum and tribe have equal footing, and it's very much a more equitable situation. Like, that's her project that she's working on. But she's called away from that because in Hawaii her father passes away and she returns for his funeral. And in returning for his funeral, she's very much met with a lot of questions about her past and her family and her role and all of these things. It's very much like causes her to reassess everything about her life. This is a very short novella. I really enjoyed it. In many ways, it's telling a very simple story when you actually just look at the plot. It is, you know, that's the setup. And then we just are with her as she's like processing this and deciding what to do with her future. So it's not overly complicated there. But where the depth comes into it is that this book is really examining like heritage, inheritance, like knowledge, like Moana has always craved this knowledge that is like family knowledge, that is knowledge of her family's role and all of this, but her father has denied her access to it. And one thing that she has to deal with when she comes back for his funeral is that like she has a cousin who he has given all that information to, and that causes friction between them. There's very much like a tension between Moana, like the relationship she has with her partner, which is very built on like, we are both driven career people, is challenged when she starts to want to prioritize like finding this information about her past and her family and ancestral knowledge and all that kind of thing. Like, it doesn't match up with this fiance's like vision of what their life is supposed to be. I will say I thought lots of people in this were very like, her fiance is like, what do you mean you want to stay for a while and figure out your thoughts? And I'm like, the girl's dad just died. That's not unreasonable. The writing style of this is quite sparse. Essentially, I realised after I read it that this was originally written as a screenplay, and it didn't get picked up. I think that I can't remember all of the details about like that process, but essentially, instead of having it just disappear into the ether and have nothing come of it, she adapted it into this novella. And I definitely think you can tell that it started life as a screenplay, because very much like it's written in a way where there's not like a huge amount of excess descriptors, and also like it very much is like scenes. Like, I could see this be filmed, like I can see it in my head like as a movie. And so there is, I would say that at the edges, that means that there is occasionally like a lack of depth in some of the like writing and also plotting. Like, it is a plot that could be a movie for sure, where you have to sort of, you know, when you adapt books to films, you have to cut things out. It kind of already has those things cut out for you. But I still really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it. Penultimate book I want to talk about is The Lives of Brian by Brian Johnson. He is the vocalist for AC/DC. This is a book that my dad lent me because my dad is working his way through classic rock biographies. I've really enjoyed this. This is very much not looking at his time with AC/DC. This is looking at all of his time leading up to getting the role as AC/DC singer, because if you're not familiar with the band, their original vocalist died, and Brian Johnson is their second vocalist who they brought in afterwards. But he had a brief stint of fame with Jodi, but largely like had given up on being able to do music full time by the time he got the call that AC/DC would like him to audition. And he was like, I mean, I'll go for it, but like, I don't think they'll want me. So this was a really interesting look at growing up in Newcastle at this particular time. Brian Johnson's father was from Newcastle. His mother was Italian. They met during the Second World War when his dad was in Italy. His mother left a fiance to be with his father and then moves to Newcastle in the 50s. And it was very hard going. Like, he was treated, because he was half Italian, like even by family members, as like a dirty foreigner kind of thing. Like his he says like a really casual anecdote about how one time his aunt took him out in the snow without any shoes because his type don't need those, and stuff like this. Like, so there was very much like that element that his family were dealing with, which was like being treated as other for a while, along with just, you know, America in the 50s was booming. Britain in the 50s was not. Food was still rationed for a long time. Like, it wasn't a booming wonder time. So his upbringing, and then talking about trying to make it in the music business, like gigging with bands, and how all of that works, like that was really, really interesting. I also thought that he had a really nice tone in this. Like, he was quite funny. There was a self-awareness sometimes to his writing, which I really enjoyed. And I just found this a really engaging read. Sometimes when you read classic rock biographies, you come away and you're like, wow, you are a dickhead. Not with this one. I came away and I was like, you know what? You seem like quite a nice man. He goes up to the point where he becomes the vocalist of AC/DC, and they record Back in Black. And then that's sort of where that AC/DC chapter ends. I believe this is because he is planning another book that will be the AC/DC tell-all, but I have seen reviews of this where people are complaining that he doesn't talk about his time with AC/DC, so I'm just mentioning it because in case that's what you're interested in, this is very much his life before that, and there will be another one where he goes into more depth, because that's calculated business decision-making. The final book I will mention is just a DNF. This is The Silk Roads, A New History of the World by Peter Frankopan. I mentioned in my TBR video that I had heard mixed things about this. I'm actually not going to slag this off because I didn't get far enough into this to tell whether or not those problems would be problems that I would feel, because, to be honest with you, I just wasn't really engaging with it. I had this on my currently reading shelf literally all month, and then I got to the end of the month and I was like, I'm like 48 pages in and I have no drive to read this. It was lent to me, so I'm just going to return it. It's not like a loss to me personally, but I just mention it in case you were hoping for me to feedback on whether those thoughts about the letter part of the book felt that way for me. I don't know, because I didn't get there because I barely left the first chapter. That is it. That is everything that I wanted to talk about in my May wrap-up. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these books or any of your May reading highlights. Please do leave a comment down below if you fancy it. But otherwise, I hope you have a lovely day, and I will see you next time for something different.